We were halfway through our wedding vows when Ethan Cole reached into his jacket. I thought he was going for the ring. Instead, he pulled out a dark blue folder. He turned away from me and faced the first row, where his mother, Diane, sat with both hands pressed over her heart. "Before I finish my vows," he said, "there's one more promise I want to make today. And I want everyone here to witness it." More than 200 guests went quiet. Ethan's eyes filled almost immediately. "My father left when I was young. My mother raised me alone. She worked 2 jobs. She emptied most of her retirement account so I could stay in law school. Everything I have started with what she gave up for me." Diane covered her mouth. Someone near the front was already wiping tears. Ethan looked straight at her. "So I updated my estate plan this week. If anything ever happens to me, the house on Maple Ridge will go to my mother. No matter what happens in life, I need to know she'll always have a home." The room broke into applause. Someone behind me whispered, "Now that's a good son." I stood across from Ethan with my bouquet in both hands and felt the stems dig into my palms. The house on Maple Ridge was worth about $1.2 million. Every dollar used to buy it had come from the inheritance my parents left me after they died. And Ethan had not set our house. He had talked about it as if it were his alone. His estate. His plan. For about 2 seconds, I wasn't even angry. I was confused. Then one question pushed everything else out of my head. Why did Ethan believe he had the legal right to decide what happened to the entire house? 3 years earlier, my parents had died in a car accident. For months afterward, I could barely finish a grocery list, let alone manage insurance claims, probate documents, bank transfers, tax forms, and a real estate closing. Ethan was a corporate attorney. Mergers and acquisitions. Contracts. Entity structures. The kind of person who could read 40 pages of legal language without getting a headache. He took over everything I couldn't handle. He sat beside me at the hospital before they turned off my mother's ventilator. He helped me clean out my father's study. He answered calls from insurance companies when I couldn't stop crying long enough to speak. And when I decided to use part of my inheritance to buy a house, he handled most of that too. He told me it would be smarter to have an LLC hold title. Asset protection, he said. It sounds more complicated than it is. We'll each own 50% of the company. The company owns the house. We own the company. Same result, cleaner structure. I remember asking him twice if that meant the house would still belong to both of us. He smiled and kissed my forehead. "Claire, I'm your fiancé. I'm not opposing counsel." I trusted him. Because during the worst year of my life, his favorite sentence had been, "Give it to me. You've carried enough." Now I watched him hug his mother while our guests applauded his generosity, and for the first time, I wondered exactly what I had given him. The officiant smiled, clearly trying to bring us back to the ceremony. And now, the rings. I didn't move. "I'm sorry," I said. "I need to fix my makeup." Ethan blinked. "Right now?" 5 minutes. I gathered the skirt of my dress and walked off the platform before he could argue. Inside the bridal suite, I locked the door and called a number I hadn't used in almost 2 years. Margaret Hale had been my father's estate attorney for more than a decade. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Claire? Aren't you supposed to be getting married today?" I stared at myself in the mirror. My makeup was perfect. "Margaret, I need you to check something. The house on Maple Ridge. I need to know exactly who owns it." She went quiet. "Why are you asking me this now?" "Because Ethan just announced in the middle of our wedding that if he dies, the house goes to his mother." This time the silence lasted longer. When Margaret spoke again, the warmth was gone from her voice. "Claire, do not sign anything else today." My grip tightened around the phone. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm opening the old file. Stay on the line." I slipped the phone into my clutch without ending the call. 3 minutes later, I walked back into the ballroom. Ethan was standing near the altar telling guests I'd had a makeup emergency. When he saw me, relief spread across his face. He reached for my hand. I walked past him and took the microphone from the officiant. "Thank you, everyone, for coming." The room quieted. "We'll return all gifts and checks after today. Dinner will still be served, and the bar is already paid for. Please stay and enjoy yourselves if you'd like. Ethan's smile disappeared. I looked at him once. Then I said, but the wedding is over. For 3 full seconds, nobody made a sound. Then the room exploded. Claire. Ethan crossed the space between us and took hold of my arm. Not hard enough to leave a mark. Hard enough to make the message clear. We're talking in private. Now. He pulled me into a side room and shut the door. The moment it clicked behind us, the polished groom disappeared. What the hell are you doing? Canceling the wedding. Over an estate plan? Over the fact that you just stood in front of 200 people and promised your mother a house my parents paid for. I didn't give her the house. It only matters if I die. Then answer one question. He folded his arms. Who owns the house? His jaw tightened. Claire. Whose name is on the ownership records? He looked toward the door instead of at me. My partners are out there. Clients are out there. Half my mother's family flew in for this. Do you really need to do this today? I almost laughed. You were fine discussing ownership when you were telling the entire room you had $1 million house to leave your mother. His face hardened. Are you mocking me? I'm asking where my money went. Footsteps stopped outside the door. A second later, Diane pushed it open. Her eyes were red. She held a folded tissue in one hand. This is my fault, she said softly. She didn't scream. She didn't throw herself on the floor. Diane never needed to be that obvious. I told Ethan once that getting older scares me, she continued. I said I worry that someday I won't have anywhere to go. I never asked him to give me your house. If I've ruined your wedding, Claire, I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. It sounded gracious. The door stayed open. Within seconds, Ethan's Aunt Nancy and several relatives were gathered in the hallway. Nancy lowered her voice as if she were being reasonable. Claire, maybe finish the ceremony and deal with the paperwork tomorrow. Canceling a wedding is a very big decision. One of our mutual friends nodded. You're both upset. You don't have to decide everything right now. Nobody called me selfish. Nobody told me I was wrong. They didn't have to. Every sentence carried the same message. Swallow it. Don't embarrass Ethan. Don't hurt Diane. Don't make a scene. I had heard versions of that message for 7 years. The first Thanksgiving I spent at Diane's house, she insisted on serving my dinner on a paper plate while everyone else used china. When I asked why, she smiled sadly and said, I don't want you thinking our things aren't clean enough for you. I was horrified. I told her I had never said anything like that. Later, I found out she had told a neighbor that I refused to eat off her dishes. When I confronted Ethan, he sighed. She's been looked down on her whole life. She gets insecure. Just don't make it bigger than it is. After that came the permanent guest room she wanted us to keep for her. Then comments about how sons should take care of their mothers when they retire. Every time I hesitated, Ethan said the same thing. She only has me. And I didn't have my parents anymore. So I kept backing up. Standing in that side room, I finally wondered whether all those small moments had taught them exactly how far I could be pushed. I looked at Diane. Do you know where the money for Maple Ridge came from? She frowned. Of course I do. Ethan bought it. You're sure? For the first time, she sounded almost offended. Ethan makes very good money. He can afford his own house. Ethan cut in sharply. Mom. Stop. Too late. I turned to him. Very good money? Diane's expression changed. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out his phone. You want to know who owns the house? Fine. He opened a document and held the screen toward me. Cole Residential Holdings, LLC. Sole member, Ethan Cole. He swiped to the next page. The closing statement listed the same company as the buyer. Then he opened a wire confirmation. Amount, $1,200,000. Sender, Ethan Cole. There, he said. The title company, the bank, the closing attorney. Every official record shows that the purchase money came from my account and that my company bought the property. The hallway behind Diane went quiet. Nancy looked at me differently now. Not cruelly. Confused. Ethan kept going. Yes, you transferred money into the house account. After that, the structure changed. You signed the funding authorization. You agreed to the entity arrangement. You don't get to call it theft 3 years later because you're angry on our wedding day. My stomach dropped. I remembered the documents. I remembered them too well. It had been 10 months after my parents died. I was still sleeping in tower stretches. Some nights I woke convinced my phone had rung and one of them was calling me. Ethan sat beside me on the couch with his laptop and walked me through a stack of documents. I had stopped him on one page. The LLC is still 50-50, right? He gave me that patient smile I used to love. Claire, I'm your fiancé. I'm not your opposing lawyer. So I signed. Now Ethan watched the color drain from my face and softened his voice. This is why I didn't want to do this in front of everyone. It's more complicated than you think. Diane exhaled as if she'd been holding her breath. I knew Ethan would never take advantage of anyone. She reached for my arm. Claire, you're about to be married. Couples can't treat every dollar like a courtroom exhibit. If you cancel your wedding over a house, are you really sure you won't regret it? I stepped away from her. Then I asked Ethan, how much did you make last year? His expression changed instantly. What does that have to do with the house? Answer me. Diane frowned. Why are you asking about his salary now? I looked at her. Because Ethan told me his take-home pay was about $6,000 a month. Diane stared at me. Then the words came out before she could stop them. 6,000? His bonus alone was over 100,000 last year. How could he only make 6,000 a month? The room went still. Ethan turned toward her. Mom. Diane's mouth opened, then closed. I looked back at him. How much? He said nothing. How much did you make last year? His eyes dropped for half a second. Around 420,000. I heard someone in the hallway inhale sharply. $420,000. For 3 years, Ethan had shown me a monthly budget built around roughly $6,000 in take-home pay. Every month, he transferred $5,500 into our household account and joked that he kept only $500 for himself. I thought it was romantic. I thought he was giving everything he had to our future. So I paid off the balance on his car when he said cash was tight. When Diane needed major repairs on her house, I covered $40,000 because Ethan told me he couldn't help her without taking on debt. One summer, I canceled a trip to Italy with 2 college friends after Ethan said money was too stressful that year. He held me that night and said, when things get easier, I'll make it up to you. Apparently things had been easy for him the entire time. I took my phone out of my clutch. The call timer was still running. 34 minutes and 11 seconds. I tapped the speaker button. Margaret? Did you hear all of that? For the first time that day, Ethan looked genuinely afraid. Margaret's voice came through calm and clear. I heard it. Ethan stared at the phone. This has nothing to do with you. Actually, it does, Margaret said. The original $1.2 million for Maple Ridge came from a separate inheritance account funded by the Bennett Family Trust. I just pulled the distribution record. Ethan gave a humorless laugh. Source of funds isn't title. Claire signed the authorization. I know, Margaret said. Which is why I'm not telling anyone in that room that the property legally belongs to Claire today. Some of the tension left Ethan's shoulders. Margaret continued. What I am saying is that I found the original operating agreement draft for Cole Residential Holdings. It lists 2 members. Claire Bennett, 50%. Ethan Cole, 50%. Ethan froze. So did I. I also found an email from the closing attorney to Ethan asking whether Claire had confirmed she was giving up membership in the LLC. Claire was not copied on that email. Ethan's voice tightened. She agreed that I would handle the structure. Then you should have something showing that she knowingly agreed to the final ownership structure, Margaret said. If you do, produce it. Until then, I'd suggest you stop telling people that this is an unstable bride trying to take your house. Nobody in the hallway spoke. I looked at Ethan. For the first time, he wasn't panicked about the wedding. He was panicked because someone had started putting his separate explanations next to each other. Claire, he said quietly, we can fix this. Fix what? If you want your interest added back, we can do that. We can redo the estate plan. If you want a prenup now, I'll have someone draft one tonight. I stared at him. Until that exact moment, he still thought the problem was paperwork. Ethan, I'm not canceling the wedding because you wanted your mother protected. He frowned. I'm canceling it because I found out today that I don't know the man I was about to marry. I pulled the ring off my finger and placed it on the small table beside us. For 7 years, you told me you didn't have money. I believed you. You told me the ownership structure was complicated. I believed you. You told me the LLC would belong to both of us. I believed that too. He opened his mouth. I didn't let him speak. Your greatest skill isn't law, Ethan. It's deciding exactly how much truth I get to see. I walked out. More than 200 people watched me cross the ballroom. This time, I didn't explain anything. Dinner was still served. I changed out of my wedding dress, put on the white pantsuit I'd planned to wear for our exit, handed the gift registry sheet to the hotel manager, and left through a side door. I did not go back to Maple Ridge. Ethan called 47 times that night. I didn't answer once. The next morning, Margaret arrived at my hotel with 2 coffees and a laptop. She didn't ask whether I still loved him. She didn't ask whether I planned to forgive him. She set the laptop on the table and said, "First, we find your money." The first bank record was simple. My inheritance account showed a transfer of $1.2 million into a joint house acquisition account Ethan and I had opened together. That part one remember, I said. Margaret clicked to the next page. 2 weeks later, the exact same amount moved from that joint account into Ethan's personal account. I leaned closer. Wait. I looked at her. Why did it go to his personal account first? Keep reading. The next transaction was Ethan's $1.2 million wire to escrow. The same wire confirmation he had shown everyone at the wedding. On paper, Ethan had paid for the house. In reality, my inheritance had traveled from my separate account to our joint house account, from the joint account to Ethan personally, and then from Ethan to escrow. He hadn't created money. He had created a paper trail that started with his name. Margaret opened the LLC records. The earliest operating agreement said exactly what I remembered. Claire Bennett, 50%. Ethan Cole, 50%. I stared at my name until the letters blurred. This is the version he showed me. I believe you. The final executed version in the closing file listed only Ethan. I never signed this version. You signed a funding authorization, Margaret said. It refers to the final operating agreement, but the final agreement wasn't attached to your copy. I closed my eyes. I remembered the night. I remembered the dark circles under Ethan's eyes because he had stayed up with me. I remembered feeling guilty that he was doing so much. I remembered signing because the man I trusted was sitting 6 inches away. But this time, I didn't just sit there while a lawyer explained my own life to me. I opened my old text message backup and searched 50/50ths. There it was. 2 days before closing, I had written, "Please make sure the final LLC is 50/50ths. I don't want some paperwork issue becoming a problem later." Ethan had replied less than a minute later. "Of course. You don't need to worry about this stuff." I pushed the phone toward Margaret. She read it once. "Preserve the original backup." I nodded. That was the moment the pattern began to take shape. Ethan had not woken up one morning and decided to steal a house. He had tested, little by little, how much I would let him handle without checking. The first time he explained a legal document, I didn't get a second opinion. The next time he said money needed to move through a particular account for closing convenience, I did what he recommended. Then he told me couples shouldn't treat money like a negotiation, and I stepped back again. Each decision by itself looked harmless. Put together, they created a life I had never agreed to. Over the next few days, I started going through our shared cloud storage myself. Not because I expected to find some dramatic confession. Because I was done letting other people decide which documents mattered enough for me to read. The first thing I found was Ethan's student loan payoff statement, dated 4 years earlier. For the last 3 years, he had repeatedly told me his loans were a major reason he couldn't save aggressively. They had already been gone. Then I found an investment statement. Then another. Then a third. 3 accounts I had never known existed. Combined value, more than $900,000. One of the accounts listed Diane Cole as beneficiary. Then I found a purchase confirmation for a small condo in the state where Diane lived. $260,000. Paid in cash. Purchased by Ethan. The money came from his own income. That discovery confused me more than anything else. If Ethan made more than $400,000 a year, had nearly $1 million invested, and could buy his mother a condo in cash, why did he need my $1.2 million at all? Why turn our house into an asset owned only by him? Why let me believe for years that he brought home $6,000 a month? Why let me pay bills he could easily afford? Why build a version of our life in which I thought he was struggling when he was already wealthy? Margaret didn't find the answer. I did. Buried inside a folder automatically synced from Ethan's old laptop was a personal annual plan he'd written 3 years earlier. Most of it was ordinary. Run a half marathon. Read 20 books. Make senior associate. Fully fund mom's retirement. Reach a 7-figure net worth. I was about to close the document when I noticed one line at the bottom. It wasn't formatted like the other goals. It looked like something he had typed to himself and never meant anyone else to see. Never be the guy everyone says married into money. I stared at the sentence. And suddenly, dozens of old moments rearranged themselves. The first time Ethan had dinner with my father, Dad asked how difficult his law school debt was to manage. It was a normal question. Ethan barely spoke on the ride home. Later, he said, "Your father looks at me like he's evaluating an investment." I told him he was imagining it. After graduation, my father offered to introduce him to someone at a top firm. Ethan refused. When we got engaged, my mother joked that she and Dad would happily help with a future house. Ethan immediately said no. "I'll give Claire a home myself." At the time, I thought it was pride. I had even admired it. Now I understood what I had missed. Ethan didn't hate using my money. He hated anyone knowing he had used it. The perfect version of his life required my inheritance to become his wire receipt. His real income stayed hidden and separate. The house belonged to his company. And then, one day, he could stand in front of 200 people and promise his $1 million property to the mother who had sacrificed everything for him. It wasn't only generosity. It was a performance of the story he needed everyone to believe. Look at me. I made it. I bought the house. I take care of my mother. I owe no one. Except the first $1.2 million holding that story together had come from my dead parents. 10 days after the wedding, Ethan came to Margaret's office. He didn't bring a lawyer. The first thing he asked after sitting down was, "How much did you find?" Margaret looked at him over her glasses. "Enough." I slid a printed copy of his annual plan across the table. His face drained of color. "Where did you get this? Does it matter?" He stared at the line about marrying into money for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "When I was a kid, everyone treated my mother like she was asking for something. I said nothing. If I couldn't pay for a school trip, a teacher would pull me aside so the other kids wouldn't hear. When I applied to college, adults kept telling me how impressive it was that I had come from that kind of home. In law school, people found out who your parents were, and the way they looked at me changed. Nobody said anything to you. They didn't have to." His control finally cracked. I knew what they thought. Poor kid finds rich girl. Suddenly every accomplishment becomes luck. Every promotion becomes a connection. Every nice thing I own becomes something her family bought. As long as I was with you, I felt like I had to prove that I had built my own life. I looked at him. "So you used my money to prove you didn't need my money?" He shut his eyes. "I know how that sounds." "It doesn't sound ridiculous," I said. "It sounds cruel." He opened his eyes again. "You made more than $400,000 a year. You could have told me you wanted separate finances. You could have asked for a prenup. You could have insisted we each put in half. You could have bought a different house with your own money." He said nothing. Instead, you let me believe you were barely getting by. You let me pay expenses you didn't need help with. Then you turned my parents' money into the centerpiece of a story about how completely self-made you were. I leaned forward. Because the thing you couldn't tolerate wasn't depending on me. His eyes met mine. It was anyone knowing you ever depended on me. He looked down. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he said, I'll transfer the house to you. All of it. You're not giving me anything. He flinched. That house was bought with my parents' money. Then I'll disclose everything. Every account. Every bonus. We'll redo the finances. We'll sign whatever you want. Claire, 7 years weren't fake. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Because part of me wanted to ask which 7 years he meant. Was the night he sat beside me at the hospital real? Was it real when he cried while helping me pack my father's books? Was it real when he proposed 3 months ago with shaking hands? Maybe all of it was real. That was the worst part. A person can love you and still deceive you. Love does not cancel out a lie. I believe you loved me, I said. Hope appeared in his face so quickly that I almost looked away. Then I finished. But I don't trust the world I saw when I was with you anymore. The hope disappeared. I stood to leave. Claire. I stopped at the door. My mother didn't know the 1.2 million came from you. I turned around. What? I always told her I bought the house myself. She knew the LLC was in my name. She knew about the estate plan. But she didn't know where the purchase money originally came from. He rubbed both hands over his face. She brought up the estate issue months ago. She said once I got married, she worried that if something happened to me, everything would go to you and she'd have nothing. I told her I'd take care of it. He stopped there. I understood the rest. Diane might not have helped create the ownership structure. She might truly have believed her son bought Maple Ridge with his own money. But she had been very willing to believe it. Willing enough never to ask how a lawyer in his 30s had suddenly paid cash for a $1.2 million house. 2 weeks later, Diane mailed me a 3-page letter. It wasn't really an apology. Most of it explained how hard it had been to raise Ethan alone. How humiliating it felt to need help. How frightening it was to imagine that marriage would make her son choose someone else first. Near the end, she wrote one sentence that explained more than the other 3 pages combined. Maybe Ethan wasn't completely honest about money, but you cannot deny that everything he has today, he earned through his own hard work. I read that line twice. Then I understood what Ethan and Diane shared more deeply than money or loyalty. They both needed the same story to be true. Ethan had built everything himself. Any fact that didn't fit that story got rewritten. My inheritance became his capital contribution. The bills I paid became voluntary support between partners. The sacrifices I made because I thought he was struggling became proof that I worried too much about money. And if I asked questions, I became the woman who kept score. A month after the canceled wedding, Ethan's law firm opened an internal investigation. I didn't report him. Margaret had been requesting old documents when she discovered that a junior attorney at Ethan's firm had helped revise the LLC operating agreement years earlier. That alone was not a scandal. What concerned the firm was how Ethan had used firm email and letterhead for a private transaction without opening a formal personal matter, without a conflict review, and without making clear to the junior attorney that the purchase funds primarily came from my separate inheritance. Once the junior attorney learned there was now an ownership dispute, he went to a partner himself. Real life did not turn into television. No police officers marched through the lobby. Ethan did not lose his law license the next morning. The firm removed him from 2 major client matters while it reviewed what had happened and asked him to explain why firm resources had been used in a private transaction where he had a direct personal interest. They also wanted to know why a junior lawyer had been involved in documents that later became central to an ownership dispute with Ethan's own fiancé. The investigation bothered him. But I don't think that was what hurt him most. What hurt him most was a sentence that began circulating among people at the firm. That house Ethan always said he bought himself? The money came from his fiancé's parents. It was the exact fact he had spent years trying to erase. A few months later, Ethan resigned from the firm. He did not go broke. He did not lose his license. He still had enough money and experience to rebuild his career somewhere else. But the image he valued most had cracked. The self-made lawyer. The man who owed nothing to anyone. The son who could take care of his mother without help. For the first time, people around him knew that the story had been more complicated than he wanted them to see. 3 months after the wedding, we reached a settlement over Maple Ridge. Ethan transferred all ownership in Cole Residential Holdings to me and waived any claim to the house. In return, I did not pursue every household expense I had paid over the years, and I did not drag the dispute into public litigation. Margaret asked me twice whether I was sure. "You could keep going," she said. "There are arguments we haven't even tested yet." "I know. Then why stop?" I looked at the stack of documents between us. "Because I don't want to spend another year proving why I'm entitled to get back something that was mine to begin with." The day the transfer was finished, I went to Maple Ridge alone for the first time in months. The house had been empty since the wedding. The 12-seat dining table we bought for married life was still in the dining room. Upstairs, the guest room Diane had already claimed as hers still had the paint color she picked. I stood in the doorway for a long time. Then I called a real estate agent. "I want to sell the house." She sounded surprised. "Are you sure? You've only owned it for 3 years." I looked out the window at the backyard Ethan and I had once argued about filling with hydrangeas. "Not we," I said. "I bought it." The house sold 2 months later. I didn't buy something bigger. I didn't move across the country. I didn't meet a perfect man in an airport lounge and begin some dramatic new romance. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment less than half the size of Maple Ridge. Every bank account required my login. I knew what every bill cost. And every document that needed my signature, I read from the first page to the last. 6 months later, Ethan sent one final email. There was only one sentence. "I spent my whole life trying to prove I didn't need anyone, and I pushed away the person who was most willing to stand beside me." I didn't reply. I didn't feel triumphant either. I archived the message and went back to my breakfast. Everyone at the wedding thought I called off the wedding because Ethan wanted to leave a house to his mother. That wasn't really why. The estate plan was only the first moment I saw the other version of our life he had been writing without me. In Ethan's version, he was completely self-made. The house was his. The money was his. The decisions were his. My only job was to trust him. So in the end, I didn't just get a house back. I got back the right to decide what was mine, what was true, and what kind of life I wanted to live next.